Today I'm with my friend Ron Nachum, CEO and co-founder of Sapien.ai, and Sapien has created an AI native financial intelligence platform. Ron, I first want to start off by quoting you and then have you talk a little bit about the problem. So, quoting you, you said the reality is that most companies are what we call data rich, analysis poor, and a customer recently told you that Sapien's AI agents can do the work of 90 to 100 analysts, and we would never staff that many. So, good to have you today, Ron. Let's first
Appreciate
talk
it.
about that intense problem, data rich, analysis poor.
Yeah, 100%. First of all, thanks for having me on.
Yep.
Really excited to share some of the thoughts on what we've been working on at Sapien. But I think the truth is, every company sitting on huge amounts of data, and in fact, the bigger problem is that there's too much data. It's in a bunch of different systems. There's companies that we work with that are on 7 disjoint ERPs, all in different countries or different systems. They have several different CRMs that they brought in via acquisition. There's a data warehouse over here. And ultimately, it's not a problem with this analysis being particularly hard. Like, we're trying to answer
Mm.
questions that drive the business forward. We want to do our reporting at the end of each month, or we want to understand how weather trends affect our energy spending, or we want to understand like which products we're making the most money on. Like, none of these are actually incredibly difficult things to do, but they rely on data from so many different systems and it would take so much time. And most companies just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so a lot of what we get excited about is building out systems that can understand the nuances of companies. Because really where it boils down to is you can't just build a formula or an automation. Like RPA and these previous ways of doing things isn't enough. You have to have a system that actually understands enough about the company, and then you can use this data to really change the framing of the types of questions you can answer. And what we think about here is, if you're the CFO of a mid-market manufacturer, or if you're the CFO of a Fortune 500 company, the questions that you ask are going to change if it takes your team a week versus 10 minutes to bring those questions in. Now you can ask way more questions. Now you can get way more granular. Now you're pulling in a much greater depth of data. And at the end of the day, it's just something that there isn't enough people in the world to do. But if we could do it 100 times cheaper, every company wants to do 100 times more of this type of analysis. So it's a little bit of what we think about there.
Well, I also saw that you're described as a secret weapon for finance teams. So why would you say that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people are really scared of with AI is kind of a couple pieces. But one is that it's going to replace a lot of jobs. And the other is that it's a black box that's hard to trust. And I think part of why we call the company Sapien and part of why we operate the way that we do is it's supposed to be something that is like a middle layer, if you will, on how people operate. And so it's like secret in the sense that it's not like at the surface level. It's not like external facing. It's not something like, each company's customers might see or something like that. It's something very internal, but it makes every person 10 times more powerful, right? If your FP&A analyst or if your accounting team or if your operations team is able to answer that many more questions, it ends up enabling the finance team to actually partner much more directly with the rest of the business. And so the idea of secret is almost like it's kind of somewhere in the middle between these
Mm.
pieces. It's not super visible, and it's not, oh, it's just going to go replace these roles. It's actually going to go make these roles significantly more powerful and enable a lot of people who are currently doing manual data entry or more of the like tedious analysis to actually do the more higher leverage work. What we see with a lot of these finance functions is that most people are spending 80 or 90% of their time just literally stitching the data together and
Mm.
getting started, and 10% of their time doing the actual strategic work. Sapien's about flipping this on its head. How do you get AI systems to go and understand all your data across these places, understand the context of you're a mid-market manufacturer, or you're a telecom company, you're a hospital system, or whatever it might be, and bring all that together, and then ultimately build trust, right? Building that trust layer of we actually trust every number that's coming out of the system, and we can go and audit, click on every number, see exactly where it came from. So kind of sitting in that middle layer of the finance and operating functions where you're enabling those to be better partners for the business, but also we have folks in the rest of the company start using these systems as well, kind of over time as more data is into
Mm.
that. So that's a little bit of where we kind of sit with the companies that we work with.
So I know you talked in one place about trust and understand, like people won't use what they don't trust and understand. And I also know that you talked about simplicity. So you just mentioned that you can drill down into all the data and audit it, but you don't want to overload the user with tons of information. So let's talk a little bit about more of the how you trust and understand, and why that adoption helps out companies so much.
Yeah, no, it's actually an amazing question. You actually framed it exactly how I would frame it, which is we have this quote internally, which is you want to be able to turn the lights on, but you don't want them on all the time. And that's kind of the idea of like what we realized early on actually was when you showed too much of how every number is calculated, people trusted it less. They're like, why do you feel the need to explain to me exactly how this number is calculated like up front? Like it almost like makes me feel like I should be questioning it. And so we see trust in a couple of different areas. I think trust with the type of data that we work with, like the most central data of any company, financial data, operational data, it's very core to the business. The first piece of trust is on security. and deployment team with folks who have done, infrastructure work at the largest scale. And we support all these different types of models where we can get, as much trust from like a multi-tenant architecture, something that's like custom built for like a Fortune 50 that we're working with. And so that's like first element of trust. It's just like the basics of security and data, and like, we're not going to train on your data and those sorts of pieces. There's the other element then of, okay, how do we actually trust this AI system and work with it as like almost like a thought partner? Because it's different than every other software of the past. It's a platform shift. It's a different way of thinking about interacting with a computer than has literally ever existed before. And so a lot of what we do here is we kind of think of it as like a 3-phase process, if you will. And usually with most customers, phase 1 is like take what they're already doing and show them that they could do it on Sapien. Take your exact monthly management report, take your exact attribution analysis, take your exact, variance walks or whatever it might be, and make that exactly the same on Sapien. And this is great because it builds trust in AI systems. It shows clear ROI for customers. It gives them the ability to backtest on previous months. And almost every time we do this, Sapien actually finds an error in how they've been doing it up until this point. We found $10 million errors, $100 million errors. Like the scale of errors than manual work is absurd. And that then builds the trust to go to step 2, which is, okay, let's get deeper. The same exact process that you're doing, we're going to get really granular with it. We're going to get down to the SKU level or the customer level or the transaction level where you couldn't ever do that before because it would have taken days and days and days of work. And then phase 3 is, okay, let's expand to doing other stuff now. Let's do the analyses that you never even thought about doing because it would have taken weeks to stitch together these data sources. And the way we make this trust happen is that first step of these, they're called modules. It's a repeatable process in Sapien where the AI still has some flexibility to think about the data. If the data changes and those sorts of pieces, it can still adjust, but it's going to give you the same structure and analysis every single time. So it kind of maintains that consistency. And then we give people the ability to click on every number and see exactly where it came from, see the data sources, see the steps, challenge any assumptions that were made there. And this is very powerful because when you challenge an assumption on Sapien, it learns it for the future. And so this, especially at enterprise, is so powerful, is you're building trust because you're training it like an analyst in plain English. Like, hey, this is what this data means. This is how to work with this information. And it takes knowledge that's been in people's heads that they've never written down before and puts it into a system for the first time, which is incredibly, incredibly powerful. We end up actually serving not just like an AI software platform, but actually as a partner to these businesses in terms of like, what does your data governance strategy look like? And what does your like internal like alignment on different databases you work with or definitions of certain terms? Because Sapien is ingesting all this information from all the users across finance and operations and other areas. And that also helps build trust because frankly, it's important to position yourself not just as a platform, but as a partner, as I mentioned. And a lot of boards and CFOs are looking to implement AI, but it's very difficult to think about how do you actually sift through the noise? What do you need to do here? We try to abstract away as much of that as possible, but giving the customers we work with a ton of control over how does the AI think about my business? How do I understand what it's doing? And it all kind of goes into this process of like kind of going incrementally into it. By the time people are at phase 3, they're like, yeah, I want this AI to do everything. I want it to plug into our entire, SQL database and our Salesforce and our NetSuite and just pull everything in as much as possible to work with it.
So you talked about finding mistakes, but I also saw in some places that you talked about unlocking hidden profits. And I think it tied into the ability to have mid-month visibility or instant visibility. And so maybe talk about the power of unlocking profits and how the speed of analysis enables that.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is where like why I am really excited about what we do at Sapien is because there's like the hard cost savings element of like, yes, we're going to save companies hundreds or thousands of hours and we're going to do more analysis than possible before. But the other part of it is the soft cost savings. And like they're also hard, but it's kind of like maybe one more step to get there of like, what does better analytics mean for a company? I think like a good example is like a mid-market manufacturer that we work with. I'll give some dummy numbers here, but like let's say they're doing, I don't know, $500 million in revenue. They probably have only a few financial analysts. Like the teams are very small. It might be like 5 to 10 financial analysts on the entire finance team. And they're just bandwidth constrained. They're only getting the very high level understanding of the data once a month. And so what this process looks like is every month, they'll spend a week or two stitching together the data. They'll present to the board a few more days after that. By the time the board's making a decision, the first piece of data that's relevant to this was 8 weeks ago, possibly. Like that's the type of scale we're talking about. And now if you think about it, companies doing 500 million in revenue, let's say they're doing like, 400 million in costs each year. That 8-week period, if they could run even 1% more efficiently, that's millions and millions of dollars right there. And to be very practical here, we work with companies that, for example, have contracts with wholesalers that are actually dependent on commodity prices, but their pricing is fixed. So their internal cost depends on the fluctuating price of, let's say, oil or a certain type of metal or a certain type of nut that is part of their process. They actually don't realize that they're losing money on a contract until 8 weeks later. And because Sapien is sitting on top of all this data and it's a very flexible foundation, it all boils down to Sapiens AI agents build an understanding of the data exactly where it lives, build an understanding of the company. This isn't something you could just create a formula for. Like, hey, we want to know which contracts we need to renegotiate. Because Sapien goes and thinks about this data and can do it mid-month, can do it constantly. It doesn't take it days, it takes it 5 minutes. So you can do it every night. Now you're getting that visibility consistently. And this, for our customers, has enabled, 8-figure, sometimes even 9-figure scale of opportunities unlocked just because the data is right there, but you don't have an analyst who's staying up all night, every night digging through it. And even if they did, to the point of the quote you mentioned earlier, it's not 90 or 100 analysts, it's not 1,000 analysts. Like, there is so much existing in that data that you could unlock. So that's like some of the examples that we see there is, purchase price variances, contract renegotiations, like gross margin all the way down to like the SKU or customer level, looking at like anomalies in invoices. We have like companies that work with like large scale like vendor data for them. And across all their vendors, there might be like one anomaly in Georgia that's they're spending way more than they should be compared to the other vendors. And nobody was ever going to dig into data to that level of granularity to go and renegotiate that contract. So this is like some of the examples that we see kind of across the board.
I also looked at some of the simple prompts that you can ask the system or tell the system to do. Like one was graph my margins by region. Another one was prepare my quarterly board deck. So simple things like that. Not only can you get pretty quick, like instant results in minutes or something like that, but you can also set those on automatic mode, can't you?
Yeah, so it's one of the really cool things we have is it's called Sapien Proactive. And the idea here is, right, there's a lot of value in being able to ask ad hoc questions. In fact, it's one of the biggest value drivers of Sapien is I can ask a question that traditionally I'd have to go get a couple analysts to go and dig into, and then they would have to context switch and think about this new data, and then they would spend a few days working on it. They'd send it back to me. I wouldn't look at it for a few days. Then I would go look at it, and then I'd have to ask them to change one little thing. Like the ad hoc nature is very powerful because it gives you that capability. But the bigger thing here is like, look, there's been analytics in BI for years and years and years. Like there's been systems that do this type of work. We work with a lot of companies that have Power BI or Tableau or these sorts of things. And they quickly realize that they're not getting that much value out of these systems because they don't understand the data. And so in this case in particular, Sapien can sit on top of the ERP, on top of the data warehouse, on top of these systems of record. And as new data comes in, you can even set it up to just be thinking about things. Like, hey, our priority right now is we want to turn around one of our plants in Georgia, or we want to increase our gross margin for like these specific products. And Sapien can just go and instead of you saying like, hey, I want a dashboard with 3 numbers, you can say, I want to just be thinking about these problems all the time. Like, how do I get better in these areas of my business? And Sapien can basically sit there and every night spend 15, 20, 30 minutes just digging into the data. And we have CFOs or analysts that wake up in the morning and are just like, great, I would have taken weeks to put this together, but Sapien's thinking about it for me and surfacing anomalies or surfacing proactive opportunities. And that ends up being one of the very powerful parts of it, and where we see the future of Sapien as well, like in the long term, is can it almost be like this shadow CFO, right? That's like the secret weapon idea. Is like it's almost in the background doing all this type of work, and whenever it realizes something about the business or new things, it's surfacing it up to the team to act on it. Because we're really, really good at thinking strategically. We're really good at executing. We're really good at like all the key pieces that go around this work. But humans were not built to dig through millions or billions or trillions of rows of data, right? It's not the most effective skill set for us. And so the proactive nature of it and the ability to basically just say, hey, like, this is what matters to us right now. How do we move this number forward? It helps separate what's become a very KPI-centric business structure. Like we have 3 KPIs we're trying to optimize, but sometimes companies will optimize these KPIs and the business doesn't actually get better. So the question is, how do you almost separate the very numbers-based approach that all companies have today and actually enable it to be like one step more abstract? Like, what do we care about improving in the business today? And so the practice helps a lot with this because it enables many more use cases than were possible before we kind of had that functionality enabled.
So who's an ideal prospect for you?
Yeah, I think for us, like there's a few types of companies that we work with the most, but I'd say like the number one thing we think about is like operationally complex businesses, right? Like any type of company that we're plugging into, we want it to be as operationally complex as possible. And that means that we work a lot with like manufacturers, retailers, like healthcare, telecom, like those kinds of businesses where there's like lots of moving parts and they're very gross margin sensitive.
So if companies are interested in the product and learning more, how would you like them to engage and learn more from you?
I also recommend on our website, we have like a contact form at the bottom where you can just put in some quick information and one of our sales reps can follow up with you directly.
Well, thanks for your time today, Ron, and looking forward to watching the growth and excitement.
Amazing. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.